Welcome back to Uprising, Arun Gupta.
It's great to be here.
In the flesh rather than on the phone, as you do every Thursday morning.
In sunny, hot LA.
Yes. So you are someone who's been paying a lot of attention to the new incarnations of the labor movement, as well as to union organizing. And now is a very interesting time, politically speaking, both at the grassroots level and at Capitol Hill, because the Democratic Party is realizing it sort of has its future hinging on whether it can lift the country out of the economic slump, and they have put a lot of effort into trying to pass a federal minimum wage law. But and of course they're hampered by what the House Republicans allow them to do. But at the state level and at the city level, things are changing quite fast. And you wrote recently about Seattle and its plan to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Progressives were very excited about this, but the devil is in the details. And you point out that this plan, it's kind of complicated, and in its complexity lies its flaws. Explain to us.
Well, that is the point of it, to make it complex. I was looking at the long-term capitals gain tax, and it's very simple. You pay 15 or 20%, and there's another little tax on it that was added in for Medicare. But when it comes to this plan, and what we need to be clear about, this plan is coming from the political establishment, but it's really coming from this intense grassroots pressure and mobilization for a higher minimum wage. And so this is just kind of a strategic retreat on their part, that they're saying, like, okay, we'll give you the $15 an hour, but now they're trying to slice and dice it to death. They have 4 different wage schedules. When all is said and done under the proposal, and that's all it is now, is a proposal. It's before the Seattle City Council. I was there in the chambers on Monday, May 5th, when they took it up, the first time they took it up for action. And it won't be until 2025, 11 years from now, that all workers in Seattle will get what is estimated to be an inflation-adjusted minimum wage of $15 an hour, based on 2017, and by 2025 it's supposed to be 1813, and so you can just start to see some of the complexities in that. So there's one schedule for large businesses, and those are defined as over 501 employees or more, right? So under this plan, you could have 500 employees and be a small business.
Wow.
And we're talking Seattle, which is one of the significant nodes of global capital in the tech industry. You could have $1 billion company and have less than 500 employees.
But be a small business.
But be a small business. So first, it's 3 years. The way to understand it, 3 years for McDonald's, Amazon, and Starbucks to get to $15 an hour. And why do they need 3 years? The city councilor who's led the charge, Shama Sawant, who's with the Socialist Alternative Party, she really stunned the political establishment last year by winning a seat on the $15 an hour minimum wage platform. She says, why do McDonald's workers need to live in poverty for one more day? So under the proposal, they get 3 years. If they provide health care, and it has to be at least silver level quality under the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, then they have 4 years. Now, if you're a small business and all you provide is wages, so no health care, and your employees don't get tips, you have 7 years to get to $15 an hour. If your employees get health care or get tips, then they introduce this new category called minimum compensation. And it's one of these plans that about halfway you're through it, your eyes are starting to glaze over, and I think that's really the point. You want to get people so enmeshed in the details, it becomes so difficult to follow that except for those who are really passionate about it, everyone else is going to stop caring.
And so, of course, CEOs do not have to wait a year or two or at all to get their raises and bonuses. What is the justification being given for this time? Is it that they have to plan their budgets?
Well, the CEOs of McDonald's and Starbucks, so while the minimum wage in Washington State, it has the highest minimum wage in the nation, it's $9.32 an hour. The CEOs of McDonald's and Starbucks earn about $9,000 an hour. And the justification is that
In the time it took you to say that sentence, they probably earn a couple $100.
Oh, yeah, of course. They're earning $150 a minute. So the justification is this is what we needed for buy-in. And I think, as with a lot of these things, the role of organized labor is all over the place. There's some unions who have really come out in favor of a strong $15 an hour. But then the unions that basically the mayor hand-selected. Now, what the mayor did, there was a new mayor who also came into office at the same time as Shama Sawant. This is at the beginning of 2014. He set up this income inequality advisory committee, and it was a handpicked committee of 24 prominent people in Seattle, and it was it has all that usual language crap about like we're going to get all the stakeholders and we're going to come up and we're going to come up with a win-win solution, and we're going to like move Seattle forward, and just really that bureaucratic pablum that makes you choke to death on. And so this committee that he set up, it was majority business owners and corporations. It was 12 of the 24, and then a 13th worked for a Microsoft Foundation. The Chamber of Commerce, there were two different chambers of commerce represented. Why do you need to have two different chambers of commerce? Why do you even have to have one?
Is just not enough.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And Chamber of, and the Chamber of Commerce is really just one of the most heinous institutes in the country in terms of how it wants to drive down wages, destroy any sort of regulation or public oversight. And so basically through the Chambers of Commerce, Starbucks and McDonald's had a seat at the table, but the workers didn't have any representatives at the table. Then you did have some labor representatives, and it's the labor representatives who were really most enthusiastic about the deal. I talked to David Rolfe, who's head of an SEIU healthcare, a large healthcare local, and he explained, that he was like, we needed to get a supermajority buy-in, and it's just like, of course, McDonald's could pay right away, but this is politics. We couldn't take a purist position, and that's, I think, always kind of the sellout.
What is Shama Sawant's position, the socialist city councilor who has led the charge to make this happen? Is she disappointed that this isn't a straightforward plan that would take effect immediately?
Yeah, I mean, this puts them in a bind, and I think it's important to I think one of the really amazing things is kind of this tension between leaders and movements. That this is real politics in action that we see going on in Seattle. So certainly Shama Sawant, she's really eloquent, passionate. She's very quick on her feet. I'm really impressed how she's able to always show the propaganda behind the positions. Like she was asked about, like, isn't this going to hurt small businesses? And her response was like, paying workers who pay poverty wages are not the problems of small businesses. It's the corporations that are the problems of small businesses. So the movement that is around this, there's Shama Sawant, there's the party she's a leader of, Socialist Alternative, then there's this $15 Now campaign, and they're also this kind of broader community coalition that they're putting together. The thing is, they recognize from their perspective this is a partial victory but inadequate. But because you have organized labor, some of the big unions who are now backing this deal enthusiastically, what it means is that they have a ballot initiative going, where it's what they want to do is basically have large businesses pay immediately, a 3-year phase-in. For small businesses, no minimum compensation, nothing about tips and all that, a different definition of small business. They even had to make compromises, like their definition of small business is 250 employees. And in fact, when Shama Sawant was elected, they were like, no, 15 now immediately across the board for everyone. So but this is the game of politics, and what she says, and I think is correct, is like, we're trying to build a working class movement, and the thing is, are we going to build it with winning something or a defeat? And so, there is, I hear plenty of sniping from the left, like, oh, they're selling out, this is just throwing some bones to the working class. At the same time, when you have the unions who are lining up with this plan, it's very hard to, be just out on the fringes, and you can, tilt at windmills. But what effect is that going to have? I think, they are taking a very sensible approach that, we need some sort of victory, and let's build on this.
Now, the proposal is in front of the city council, but the city council, I understand, could actually dilute it even more.
The city council can do whatever it wants, right? It's the legislative body. It can.
They can strengthen it.
They can strengthen it. They can also tear it apart, or they can also just not pass it. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is, I think a lot of them are looking over their shoulders at this movement, which is why when I was in the council chamber, to hear the city council for the most part was pretty silent. They had a lot of expert testimony, but to hear experts from the mayor's office say things like, workers are paid too little in this country, it was a remarkable moment. And plus, the council chambers were filled with probably over 100 advocates of $15 an hour. So they know that, they are being watched. There was a lot of media, including international media there as well. So this is not something that they can just sit on their hands and hope will go away. But one of the things they're trying to do now is, when I was there, they started suddenly talking about training wages. And it's just like, who's talking about training wages? No one's ever talked about training wages. This is what the corporations want, right? Because training wages are used in the fast food industry. And of course, training wages are used especially in regard to youth of color, women of color, because they're the ones who dominate the low ranks. And it's a way, it's just like, oh, well, they're new employees, they're being trained. And no, it's just a way to force down wages, and you're targeting the most vulnerable populations.
And it's another tier that they're trying to create. Let's talk about the common tier that gets pretty thrown under the bus all around in cities, but even federally, and that's people who earn tipped wages. We have a very unusual culture here in the United States where there's a huge sector of our economy, people working in the sector of our economy that are expected to make up to a certain wage through tips rather than getting the actual wages from their employers. Most other countries don't have this level of dependence on customer tipping. How do corporations take advantage of this tier that they've created, and what's the role? Is this also a separate category in the Seattle proposal?
The tip wages, the federal minimum wage for tipped employees is $2.13 an hour.
Which is just like mind-boggling.
Yeah, and so I eat out a good bit, especially being in New York, and I was always, and I used to deliver pizzas in college. I did it for 3 years, and I was making my money off of tips. And I always figured, people in restaurants, it's just like, that $2.13 sucks, but they must be getting paid decently. What it turns out is, like, after everything is calculated, often they're only making $8 to $9 an hour. And the thing about, tipping, you you can't plan. You don't know how much you're going to get.
You might have a good day, you might have a bad day.
Right, and often you do have bad days. You could, be hustling for 8 hours and walk out with like $40. Just this ridiculously low wage. But it also what it does is it extracts a different form of labor from you. It's not just your physical labor. It also extracts what's called affective labor, which is your emotional labor. And again, this especially impacts women because they tend to dominate in a lot of these positions. And you always have to be cheerful and smiling, and we even put up with customer sexual harassment.
If you want your tip,
and you can't complain. So I think it's something that really just needs to be completely done away with. A couple of years ago, I was in Spain visiting a friend, and we were in the Basque region and went out to a nice, not a great restaurant, and I was asking how much I should tip, and he was just like, just whatever the change is, you don't have to leave anything. But I kept insisting, now come on, I must tip something. And finally he's like, listen, Arun, it's just like they have health care. They get paid real wages. You don't have to tip
exactly.
them.
We are not in this country.
Yeah.
And that's why bartenders and waitresses get very upset when they have to serve visitors, because people outside the U.S. don't realize that tipped staff here rely on those wages. It's such an American thing, and it's such a bizarre and unusual thing.
Yeah.
So is there a conversation happening both in Seattle and at the federal level on tipped wages?
There is some discussion at the national level, but the National Restaurant Association is the one who is really extremely opposed to this. And there's this ballot initiative that Socialist Alternative is talking about, that if the bill is weakened, and one of these things is the minimum compensation, or if they feel they can push for something stronger, if they're the forces to go for it, they're going to push this ballot initiative. But they're also saying they've heard rumors, no one substantiated it, but they've heard rumors that the National Restaurant Association has allocated $30 million to defeat any ballot initiative in Seattle around $15 an hour minimum wage.
I mean, that $30 million
Yeah.
could pay how many wages?
Yeah, there are 100,000 low-wage workers, in Seattle. That alone, is $300 per worker. If they really care that much about low-wage workers. So the minimum compensation thing is actually, it's even more complex, and it's not quite as bad as it sounds, because what happens is now you have employees will fall under two different wage schedules if they're at a small business who get tips. And so they will get a minimum wage that will steadily increase. So by like 2019, they'll get a minimum wage of $12 an hour. But if they also get health care and tips, they have to get a guaranteed minimum compensation of $15 an hour.
So they do account for, under this plan, would account for tips.
And by 2025, all minimum compensation is supposed to be phased out. And so the idea is by 2025, everyone is getting paid $18.13 an hour.
Now, Arun, what happened to the airport town of SeaTac, where a lot of this struggle around $15 an hour began? There was some news that their victory would be overturned. What has happened there?
Well, the victory is still in place. That was something that there was $1 million spent to defeat it, and that also that was voted on last fall, the same time as Shama Sawant was running, and that certainly played a role in her victory. It was for $15 an hour for airport workers in the hospitality industry, and a judge ruled that it doesn't cover airport workers, but it still does cover so restaurant, hotel workers in the area. One of the interesting things about that law, and this is something that is important to point out, because I am just an unequivocal supporter of workers' movements and workers' struggles, but that doesn't mean that one should just be a knee-jerk defender of unions. There was an opt-out that was placed in it. So, in other words, unions can go to employers and say, like, hey, if you sign a collective bargaining agreement, we can agree to a lower wage. And it's just like, really, it's just like, I think that is just the height of cynicism, to essentially undercut workers' wages just so you can get more members in your union. And this has gone on in other cities as well, where unions have, like particularly Service Employees International Union, has pushed for these opt-out clauses. We'll raise the minimum wage, but if they're unionized workers, we can have a different wage.
Finally, Arun, what sort of ripple effect do you think Seattle and SeaTac can have around the rest of the country? Here in California, we do have a minimum wage increase that's set to take effect, but California has been one of the hardest hit states in the recession. Where you live, New York, the cost of living is still high, and there is some movement, at least verbally, and lip service being paid by the Democrats. And these days, even some CEOs, like the CEO of Dairy Queen and Subway, and even apparently Mitt Romney, saying, all right, it is time, we do need to raise the minimum wage. And of course, at the federal level, this is for $10.10 an hour, which is not very much.
Yeah. Well, Mitt Romney's finding it hard to get someone who can polish the gold buttons in his car elevator, so that's why he wants to raise the minimum wage. But yeah, there is movement around this, but we of course need to recognize this is all a result of grassroots struggles. This is a result of the Occupy Wall Street movement. This is a result of all the organizing around low-wage workers, whether it's our Walmart campaign, whether it's the fast food organizing, even the adjunct organizing that is going on. That is what is pushing the Democrats. Obama campaigned in 2008 that he was going to raise the minimum wage, and he sat on his hands while he was bailing out all his banker buddies and showering trillions of dollars in government support on them. So now they're finally saying, like, oh, we need to do something about the minimum wage. But let's be clear, they're also saying it because they think this can be a wedge issue in the 2014 midterm elections, in which the Democrats are probably going to get obliterated because they're, I don't want to say they're inept, because they're doing what they're supposed to. They're protecting their Wall Street fat cats at the expense of workers. But there are a lot of positive signs. One is that there are other candidates who are planning to run on similar, or who are running. In Portland, there's a young fellow by the name of Nicholas Caleb, who's running for city council on a platform of $15 an hour. In Chicago, there's a campaign coalescing around a socialist candidate for the city council there. In Minneapolis, a socialist alternative candidate last election got a high percentage of the vote. But now there are also a lot of ballot initiatives for raising the minimum wage. But I think, honestly, it's especially given it's been a little over 10 years since the start of the Iraq War, and the campaign for the Iraq War began in 2002, and if we go back to that point, George Bush was on the stump every single day, making it an issue in those midterm elections. He was hammering it again and again and again and again. And what do we see from Obama? It's just, I mean, he's the drone president. He's deadly overseas and at home, but he's completely on autopilot.
Literally droning on and on.
Yeah, it's just he's not doing anything, and so I think obviously we need to recognize that it does take forces within the establishment politics to change the situation, but the real power is first has to be created at the grassroots to change the elite structures.
Arun Gupta, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.